The silence in the obsidian sanctum was a physical weight, a pressure born of millennia of accumulated history and the fresh, raw wound of absolute defeat. High Strategist Vorlag stood before the gravitic dais, his four immense arms clasped behind his back, a posture of rigid control that betrayed the chaos churning within his tri-lobed heart. The chamber itself, carved from the core of a captured asteroid, was a monument to the Cathar Dominion's power. Walls of polished, jet-black stone absorbed all light, reflecting only the faint, internal luminescence of the mnemonic crystals that lined the high, vaulted ceiling. Each crystal pulsed with a soft, cyan light, a repository of a single Cathar ancestor's complete memories, a silent chorus of 1 billion dead voices bearing witness to this final humiliation. For generations, this chamber had been the nexus of their empire, a place of unassailable strength where strategies were forged that had shattered lesser species and bent galactic arms to the Dominion's will. Now, it was a tomb, and they were the ghosts haunting it. Outside, in the void beyond the sanctum's armored viewports, it hung. The reason for their gathering, the punctuation mark at the end of their long, bloody history, the human warship. It had arrived without ceremony, emerging from the unreal geometries of hyperspace with a silence that was more terrifying than any war cry. It had not fired a single weapon. It had not hailed them. It had simply appeared in high orbit over Cathar Prime, a sliver of impossible geometry against the swirling nebulae, a patient, predatory shadow. It had arrived after the final transmission, after the unconditional surrender of the Cathar Dominion to the relentless, consuming tide of the silicate swarm. It had come too late to witness their last stand, too late to join the fight, too late for anything but to watch them die. And yet its presence had changed everything. The swarm, which had been methodically dissolving their planetary defenses, had paused. The ceaseless, chittering advance of crystalline entities had fallen silent across the entire system, their corrosive energies held in abeyance. The war was over. The Cathar had lost, and now a victor they had never fought had come to claim the prize. "It does not move." Centurion Kale's voice was a low growl, the sound of grinding stone. He stood at the edge of the dais, his battle-scarred carapace still bearing the scorch marks of the final orbital defense. His mandibles twitched with suppressed aggression. "For 3 cycles it has remained motionless. What does it wait for? A more formal surrender? The sight of our high strategist on his knees." The Centurion's gaze was fixed on the holographic display at the center of the chamber, a shimmering, 3-dimensional representation of the human vessel. It was a stark, brutalist design, a wedge of dark metal that seemed to devour the light around it. It bristled with weapon emplacements, yet they were all cold. Its energy signature was immense, a sleeping volcano of power that dwarfed anything the Cathar had ever produced, yet it was quiescent. Vorlag did not turn. His focus remained on the phantom ship. "It waits because it can. We are defeated, Kale. The victor has no need for haste." His voice was calm, a carefully constructed facade over a chasm of despair. He had overseen the war for his entire life, as had his predecessor and his predecessor before him. A conflict that had spanned generations, a war of attrition against an enemy that could not be reasoned with, could not be intimidated, and could not be stopped. The silicate swarm was a force of nature, a galactic plague of self-replicating crystalline organisms that consumed all organic matter to fuel their expansion. The Cathar, a species defined by honor and martial prowess, had met a foe that had neither. It was a war against entropy itself, and they had lost. Their fleets were shattered, their outer colonies were crystalline husks, and now their homeworld was poised on the brink of assimilation. And then the humans had arrived. Elder Xyler, the third and final figure in the chamber, shifted her frail form. Her carapace was faded with age, her multifaceted eyes cloudy with the wisdom of centuries. She was a keeper of the mnemonic crystals, a living link to their ancestors. "Power is not always expressed through action," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "Sometimes the greatest strength lies in stillness. This presence, it is unlike any we have encountered. It does not radiate malice nor the arrogance of conquest. It radiates patience, an ancient, profound patience." "Patience is a weapon of the strong against the weak," Kale spat, the sound echoing in the cavernous room. "They mock us. They savor our defeat before they deliver the final blow. I say we give them the blow they seek. The planetary defense grid has one final charge. We could sublimate that vessel where it ha. NGS, a final act of defiance. Let the last memory of the Cathar Dominion be one of unyielding spirit." Vorlag finally turned, his gaze falling upon the Centurion. The high strategist's eyes, deep-set and shadowed, held the exhaustion of 1,000 lost battles. And what would that accomplish, Centurion? We would expend our last energy to scratch their hull, and in doing so doom every soul on the planet below to immediate annihilation by the swarm. Your unyielding spirit would be a suicide note written in the ashes of our children. No, we will meet them. We will understand what they want. And we will face our end with dignity, not with the futile rage of a cornered animal. The debate was the ghost of 1,000 similar arguments held in this chamber over the long years of the war. Kale, the embodiment of their warrior ethos, could see only combat and honor. Xyler, the spiritual heart of their people, sought meaning and understanding in the patterns of the cosmos. And Vorlag, the strategist, was trapped between them, forced to navigate the cold calculus of survival. But now, survival was no longer on the table. All that remained was the nature of their extinction. A soft chime resonated through the sanctum. A communications officer, a young acolyte whose antennae drooped with fatigue, looked up from his console. "High strategist, a signal from the human vessel." A wave of tension, thick and suffocating, washed through the chamber. The mnemonic crystals seemed to pulse a little faster, their cyan light intensifying. The moment had come. Vorlag straightened his immense frame, the weight of his office and his people settling upon him like a shroud. "On the main display, audio only, let us hear the victor's terms." The holographic ship vanished, replaced by a simple, oscillating waveform. For a long moment, there was only the faint hiss of carrier static, a sound that seemed to stretch into an eternity. Then, a voice filled the sanctum. It was unlike any language the Cathar had ever heard, yet the translation matrix, working furiously, rendered it into their own tongue with an eerie, passionless clarity. "This is Ambassador Elias Vance of the United Nations vessel Remembrance. We are addressing the recognized leadership of the Cathar Dominion. We have observed the cessation of hostilities. We request permission to dispatch a shuttle to your location to discuss the terms of this conclusion. Please respond." The voice was calm. There was no triumph in it, no threat, no demand. It was the detached, professional tone of a bureaucrat, not a conqueror. Kale's mandibles clicked in confusion and disgust. "Conclusion? They call the end of our civilization a conclusion? The arrogance is breathtaking." Vorlag ignored him. He studied the waveform, as if he could divine the intent behind the emotionless words. The humans were a relatively new species on the galactic stage. Whispers and fragmented intelligence reports spoke of them. A species of astonishing contradictions. Fragile, short-lived bipeds of soft flesh, yet they had expanded from their single star system with a speed that defied all known models of societal development. They were said to be pathologically individualistic, yet capable of terrifyingly unified action. Their technology was a bizarre mix of elegant, hyper-advanced theory and crude, brute force application. They were a puzzle the Cathar had never had time to solve, a minor power on the periphery of their long, desperate war. And now, that puzzle sat in judgment over their entire existence. "Grant them permission," Vorlag commanded, his voice resolute. "Inform them that High Strategist Vorlag will receive their ambassador here in the Obsidian Sanctum, alone." Kale took a step forward, his fists clenching. "High Strategist, this is madness, a trap. They will assassinate you and decapitate our leadership. We must not show such weakness." "Our leadership is already decapitated, Centurion," Vorlag said, his tone sharp as flaked obsidian. "Our body is dead. All that remains is the head, and it will meet its executioner with its eyes open. Your duty is to maintain order on the surface for as long as you can. Elder Xyler, your duty is to prepare the final mnemonic transfer, to ensure that the memory of our fall is preserved, if only for a few moments before the end. My duty is this." He gestured to the silent waveform. "I will face them. I will learn why a warship came too late, only to win a war it never fought." The shuttle descended from the belly of the monolithic Remembrance like a drop of ink falling through water. It was as silent and severe as its parent vessel, its engines leaving no trail, its passage through the atmosphere generating no sonic disturbance. It moved with a serene, inviolable grace, landing in the primary courtyard of the High Command Citadel with the delicacy of a falling leaf. The Cathar Honor Guard, assembled out of grim duty, stood in rigid formation, their HFY pikes held at the ready, their faces a mask of stoic resentment. They had expected a platoon of armored soldiers to emerge, weapons leveled, a display of overwhelming force. Instead, the ramp lowered to reveal a single figure. It was small, impossibly so. A bipedal creature, clad in a simple dark gray uniform that bore no rank, no insignia, no decoration of any kind. It wore no helmet, its soft, pale face exposed to the thin, alien air. Its hair was the color of ash, and its eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, seemed to absorb the scene with a placid, unnerving curiosity. This was the ambassador of the species that had humbled the galaxy's oldest empire. This was Elias Vance. He walked down the ramp with a slow, deliberate pace, his hands held loosely at his sides. He did not seem intimidated by the towering, armored warriors who watched his every move. He did not seem arrogant. He seemed thoughtful. As he approached, the Cathar guards could see the details of his physiology, the fragility of his form, the lack of any natural armor, the slowness of his movements. By every Cathar metric, he was prey. A weak, soft thing that should have been crushed by the harsh realities of the galaxy millennia ago. Yet it was his species that stood in judgment, and theirs that knelt in the dust. The cognitive dissonance of it was a palpable force, a static in the air. Vorlag watched the ambassadors approach from the sanctum's viewports. He felt a strange sense of unreality wash over him. He had spent his life warring against a faceless, inhuman force. He had imagined his final confrontation to be with a creature of immense power, a being of crystal and rage, the avatar of the swarm. He had not imagined it would be with this creature of flesh and bone, who looked as though a strong wind could tear him asunder. The doors to the obsidian sanctum hissed open. The human ambassador stepped inside, his soft-soled boots making no sound on the polished floor. He paused just inside the entrance, his gaze sweeping across the vast, dark chamber. He looked at the high, vaulted ceilings, at the silent, pulsing mnemonic crystals. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of solemnity and academic interest. He was not a conqueror entering a captured throne room. He was a historian entering a museum. "High Strategist Vorlag," he said, his voice the same calm, measured tone from the transmission. He did not bow, but he inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect that was both subtle and profound. "I am Ambassador Elias Vance. Thank you for receiving me." Vorlag moved to the center of the dais, his immense shadow falling over the human. He towered over the man, a mountain of armored carapace and muscle. He could have crushed the ambassador with a single blow. The thought was a fleeting, bitter impulse, the last vestige of his warrior instincts. He suppressed it. "Ambassador, you requested this meeting to discuss a conclusion. The Cathar Dominion has surrendered. Our fleets are dust. Our worlds are consumed. What is there left to discuss?" Vance met his gaze without flinching. His pale blue eyes held a depth that Vorlag found unsettling. They were not the eyes of a young, upstart species. They were ancient eyes, filled with a weariness that seemed to rival Xyler's. "The nature of that conclusion," Vance replied. "My government wishes to understand what has transpired here, and to offer a choice." Vorlag's mandibles parted in a silent, humorless laugh. "A choice? What choice can you offer the dead? Your vessel sits in our sky, a silent executioner. The swarm, your allies, it would seem, wait for your signal to complete their work. Do you offer us a choice of death, a quick end by your weapons, or a slow dissolution by the silicates? These are not choices, Ambassador. They are stylistic preferences for an execution." The human seemed to consider this for a moment. He took a few steps further into the chamber, his gaze drifting back to the pulsing crystals. "You misunderstand our purpose here, High Strategist. The United Nations ship Remembrance is not a vessel of conquest, and the silicate swarm are not our allies." The statement hung in the air, charged and heavy. Vorlag felt a flicker of something he had not felt in a very long time, confusion. "Then what are you? Why are you here? Your arrival coincided with the swarm's cessation. They halted their advance the moment your ship entered this system. Are we to believe that is a coincidence?" "It is not a coincidence," Vance said, his voice dropping slightly, taking on a more somber tone. "But it is also not an alliance. We did not command them to stop. We requested it." The sheer, unmitigated absurdity of the statement struck Vorlag with the force of a physical blow. The Cathar had thrown everything they had at the swarm for centuries. They had shattered planets to deny them resources, ignited stars to scour them from systems. They had developed weapons that tore at the fabric of space-time itself, and none of it had ever made the swarm so much as pause in its relentless, mindless consumption. The notion that this soft, fragile creature had simply asked it to stop was an insult to every Cathar who had ever died fighting it. "You mock us," Vorlag growled, the sound echoing off the obsidian walls. "You stand in the heart of our dying empire, and you mock us with children's tales. The swarm does not listen to requests. It is a force of cosmic hunger. It does not think. It only consumes." "That is where your understanding of the enemy was incomplete," Vance said, his gaze finally locking back onto Vorlag's. There was no mockery in his eyes, only a deep, profound sadness. They do not think as you or I do, it is true, but they are not mindless. They are an echo, a signal, a weapon left running long after its creators have vanished, and like any signal it can be interrupted, or more precisely, overridden by a stronger, more coherent signal. Vance raised his left hand. A simple, thin band of dark metal was on his wrist. It projected a small, shimmering field of light into the air between them. Within the light, a complex interlocking pattern of geometric shapes and waveforms danced, shifting and evolving with a hypnotic rhythm. This is a broadcast, a simple, resonant frequency tuned to the base crystalline structure of the silicates. It does not command them. It does not threaten them. It reminds them. It reminds them of their original state, inert, dormant, before they were weaponized. Vorlag stared at the floating image, his mind struggling to process the implications. A frequency, a simple broadcast. The key to stopping the unstoppable scourge of the galaxy was a sound. All their wars, all their sacrifice, all for naught because they had been trying to shatter a bell, when all they needed to do was stop it from ringing. The simplicity of it was more devastating than any superweapon. It was a victory of intellect over brute force, a concept that was both alien and deeply shaming to the Cathar psyche. You knew this. Your species knew how to stop them. The question was a hoarse whisper. We learned, Vance said. It took us a considerable amount of time and resources. We are a curious species, high strategist. When we encounter a phenomenon we do not understand, our first instinct is not to destroy it, but to study it. We captured samples of the swarm, contained them in temporal stasis fields. We sequenced their crystalline genome. We traced their energy patterns back to their point of origin, a collapsed star in a dead galaxy. We learned their history, a history they themselves have forgotten. They were not always a plague. They were once a tool, a terraforming agent designed to break down sterile rock into life-sustaining soil. But the signal that guided them, the signal that gave them their complex instructions, was corrupted. A flaw was introduced, a self-replicating imperative that overrode all other functions. They became a cancer. He gestured around the great chamber. You fought the cancer, high strategist. You fought it with fire and fury for centuries, and you were losing. We did not fight it. We sought to cure the disease. The broadcast from my ship is a reintroduction of the original, uncorrupted signal. It is a message of peace to a weapon that has forgotten it was once a tool of creation. The weight of this revelation settled upon Vorlag. He felt the foundations of his reality begin to crumble. His people were the greatest warriors the galaxy had ever known, yet they had been fighting a ghost, a shadow of a war that was already over. They had defined themselves by their struggle against the swarm, and now he was being told that the struggle itself was based on a misunderstanding. The war had not been won by the Cathar's strength or the human's power. It had been won by a simple, elegant piece of information. So this is your victory, Vorlag said, his voice hollow. You arrive when the battle is lost, and with a simple transmission you accomplish what our entire civilization could not. You have won instantly without firing a shot. He looked at the human, a new kind of fear dawning in his eyes, a fear far deeper than that of simple annihilation. It was the fear of obsolescence. What do you want from us? Our technology, our worlds, our servitude. What is the price for this cure? Vance let the holographic display fade. He clasped his hands behind his back, mirroring Vorlag's earlier stance. We want none of those things. As I said, we came to offer a choice. The broadcast that is pacifying the swarm is localized. It emanates from the remembrance. We can maintain it indefinitely, keeping your system and your people safe. The swarm will remain inert, a sea of harmless crystal, a monument to a war that has ended. You can rebuild. You can live. Vorlag stared, incredulous. You would protect us after we treated your nascent empire with such disdain? E saw you as little more than clever primitives. We never offered you aid. We never even acknowledged your existence beyond a footnote in our star charts. Why? Because it is the logical, ethical thing to do, Vance said simply, as if stating a self-evident truth. We have the ability to prevent your extinction at no significant cost to ourselves. Therefore, we have a moral obligation to do so. Our philosophy is not based on the glories of past conquests or the honor of a noble death. It is based on the preservation and enrichment of sentient life. All sentient life. Your past actions are irrelevant. What matters is your future. He paused, letting the silence stretch. That is the first choice. Accept our protection, live in peace. The war is over. Vorlag felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. It was too much, an offer of unconditional salvation from a complete stranger. It defied every political and military doctrine the Cathar had ever conceived. There was always a price. There was always a motive. To believe otherwise was to be a fool, and yet the human's calm sincerity was undeniable. There was no deception in his eyes, no hidden agenda in his words. There was only a vast, serene confidence. "You said there was a first choice," Vorlag said, his mind racing. "That implies there is a second." A flicker of something, perhaps a deep, abiding sorrow, passed through Vance's eyes. "Yes, there is a second choice, one that requires a greater understanding of the context of this war. I ask that you accompany me to your world's memorial chamber. There is something I must show you, something you must see before you can truly comprehend the decision you are being asked to make." The memorial chamber was a place of deep reverence for the Cathar, a hemisphere of white marble set into the planet's surface, open to the sky. At its center was the Everflame, a pillar of contained plasma that had burned uninterrupted for 10,000 years, a symbol of the eternal spirit of their people. Around it, carved into the marble walls, were the names of every Cathar who had fallen in the endless war against the silicate swarm. The names stretched for kilometers, a litany of sacrifice so vast it had become an abstract concept. Vorlag led Ambassador Vance into the chamber. The honor guard remained outside, leaving the two leaders in a bubble of profound, echoing silence, broken only by the low hum of the Everflame. The sun of Cathar Prime was setting, casting long, mournful shadows across the endless lists of the dead. Vance walked slowly along the wall, his soft hand trailing just above the carved names. He did not speak for a long time. He simply looked, his expression one of deep, empathetic sorrow. He was not gloating. He was not judging. He was mourning with them, for a species he had never met, for a war he had never fought. "The cost," Vance said finally, his voice a near whisper. "The cost is always incalculable." He turned to face Vorlag, his blue eyes reflecting the flickering light of the Everflame. "We have similar places on our homeworld, Earth, walls covered in names, monuments to those lost in our own self-inflicted wars. We are a young species, high strategist, but we have learned the lessons of grief very, very well." He raised his hand again, and the wrist projector came to life. This time it did not show a complex waveform. It showed an image, a star chart, but one that was alien to Vorlag. At its center was a single yellow star, and orbiting it, a small blue and white planet. "This is my home," Vance said softly, "and this is our history." The image shifted. It became a blur of scenes, a torrent of information that flowed directly into Vorlag's mind via a subtle, non-invasive telepathic link embedded in the projection. He saw human history. He saw their brutal, savage beginnings. He saw wars fought with sharpened stones and clubs. He saw empires rise and fall in blood and fire. He saw them split the atom and turn its power upon themselves, engulfing their own cities in nuclear fire. He saw plagues, famines, ideological conflicts that slaughtered millions. He saw a species seemingly dedicated to its own annihilation, a frantic, chaotic scramble of brilliance and self-destruction. It was horrifying. It was primitive. It was a history that should have ended in a burnt-out cinder of a world long before they ever reached for the stars. But then the images changed. He saw them rise from the ashes. He saw them unify not through conquest, but through shared grief and a desperate collective will to survive. He saw the birth of their United Nations, an imperfect, stumbling attempt at global governance that, over centuries, slowly, painfully, began to work. He saw them turn their swords into plowshares, their nuclear weapons into power plants. He saw them look up at the stars not as a new battlefield, but as a source of wonder, a canvas for their boundless curiosity. And he saw their first contact with the Illicate swarm. It was not a war. A human colony on a distant moon, a small research outpost, was the first to be consumed. There was no declaration of hostilities, no grand battle, just a silent, creeping crystalline tide and then nothing. The humans did not respond with fleets. They responded with probes, with long-range scanners, with scientific vessels that risked everything to get close to gather data to understand. While the Cathar were meeting the swarm with overwhelming force, the humans were meeting it with overwhelming curiosity. The projection showed their decades-long project, the containment facilities, the brilliant, obsessive scientists working themselves to exhaustion, the breakthroughs and the dead ends. It showed the moment a young xenolinguist, deciphering the resonant frequencies of the crystalline structure, discovered the corrupted signal. It showed the creation of the counter-frequency, the cure. And it showed the construction of the remembrance. Vorlag reeled back, his mind overwhelmed. The ship's name was not a boast. It was not a monument to a human victory. It was a memorial. A vessel designed to travel to the worlds of species lost to the swarm and offer them remembrance, to preserve their history, to honor their struggle, even in death. It was a ship of mourning, Its purpose was not to win wars. Its purpose was to archive tragedies. We were too late for so many, Vance said, his voice thick with emotion. The Lysians, the children of Yggdrasil, a dozen other species who fought and died before we could decipher the truth. We came here expecting to be too late for you as well. We expected to find your world a silent crystal tomb. We were prepared only to record your history, to add the name Cathar to the list of the remembered fallen. His gaze swept across the endless names on the wall. But we were not too late. For the first time, we arrived in time to offer more than just an epitaph. Vorlag finally understood. The warship hadn't come too late to fight the war. It had come too late to prevent it. It was a vessel of regret, not of conquest. The humans were not conquerors. They were galactic preservationists. They were driven by a profound, species-wide sense of survivor's guilt, a penance for their own violent past, and a duty to the other life forms of the galaxy. The second choice, Vorlag said, his voice trembling with the weight of it all. What is the second choice? Vance's expression grew grave. The first choice is peace. We maintain the broadcast and you live, you rebuild. Your long war is over. The second choice is truth. He altered the projection again. It now showed a map of the entire galaxy. Vast swathes of it were dark, empty. This is what our long-range sensors have shown us. We call it the Great Silence. For millions of years, the galaxy was teeming with life. Great empires rose and fell, but something happened. Something came and wiped the slate clean. One by one, the great civilizations vanished. He zoomed in on a small, insignificant-looking nebula. Within it was a single point of light, the source of the silicate swarm. The swarm was not an accident of nature, and the corruption of its signal was not a random flaw. It was deliberate. The silicates are a weapon, a self-replicating, autonomous planetary sterilization system, a scorched earth tool of immense power and patience. But they are an old weapon, a relic, an echo of a war so vast and so ancient its architects are long dead. He looked Vorlag in the eye, and the high strategist felt a cold dread that eclipsed any fear he had felt of the swarm. We have found other such echoes, Vance continued. A self-replicating swarm of nanites in the galactic core that devours all technology, a mimetic virus in the Magellanic Cloud that drives sentient species to mass suicide. They are all different, but they all serve the same purpose, to scour the galaxy of complex, intelligent life. They are the automated defenses of an unknown power, a power that has been gone for eons but whose paranoia remains, encoded in these terrible, ancient weapons. He paused. The reason we have made such rapid progress, High Strategist, the reason we have been so driven, is because we discovered this truth very early in our expansion. We realized we were not living in an empty galaxy. We were living in a house that had been meticulously, brutally cleared of all its previous occupants, and the security system was still active. The Great Silence is not a natural state. It is an enforced one. Vance's voice was low, intense. The first choice is that you live out your days in this system, safe behind our shield. The second choice is that you join us. We cannot keep the pacification signal broadcasting from a single ship forever. It makes us a target. The beings who created these weapons may be gone, but we don't know that for sure. And even if they are, there may be other weapons, other systems we haven't found yet. The true long-term solution is to build a galactic network. A series of transmitters on a scale we cannot achieve alone that will broadcast the pacification frequency across the entire galaxy, permanently neutralizing the silicate threat. And then we must begin the work of finding the others. The nanite swarms, the mimetic plagues. We must inoculate the galaxy against the weapons of its past. He gestured to the wall of names. You are warriors, perhaps the greatest warriors this galaxy has ever known. You have spent your entire history fighting a war for survival. We offer you a new war. Not a war of flesh and fire, but a war of knowledge and engineering. Not a war to defend one world, but a war to reclaim a galaxy for all life. It will be dangerous. It will take generations. It may be unwinnable, but it is the only war that has ever truly mattered. The choice hung in the air, immense and terrifying, peace and quiet obscurity, or purpose and potential extinction on a cosmic scale. Vorlag looked at the Everflame, the symbol of his people's endurance. He looked at the endless names of the dead, a testament to their willingness to fight for something greater than themselves. The swarm had been their purpose, their identity. To simply let that go, to accept a quiet life in a protected system, would be a slow death of the soul. It would be a betrayal of every name carved into that wall. He turned back to the small, fragile human who had offered him the universe. In that moment, he did not see a strange, alien creature. He saw a kindred spirit. A being who had looked into the great, silent abyss and instead of recoiling in fear, had resolved to fill it with light. Victory, Vorlag said, the word tasting strange and new. You spoke of the conclusion of the war, but this is not a conclusion. It is a redefinition. We thought victory meant the destruction of our enemy. You have shown us that true victory is the understanding of our enemy, and through that understanding a purpose far grander than mere survival. He straightened to his full, towering height, not in aggression, but in a display of solemn, final resolve. The decision was made. The path was clear. The Cathar Dominion is dead, Ambassador Vance. It died when our last warship fell, but the Cathar people live, and we have never shied away from a necessary fight. He extended one of his 4 massive hands, not to strike, but with the palm open, an ancient Cathar gesture of alliance. Tell your people that they have found their first allies in the war against the Great Silence. Vance looked at the offered hand, then up at the High Strategist. A small, genuine smile touched his lips for the first time. It transformed his weary, solemn face, lighting it from within. He placed his own small, soft hand into the center of Vorlag's immense, armored palm. The contact was a bridge between 2 worlds, 2 histories, 2 species forged in entirely different fires, now united by a common, terrifying purpose. As they stood there, the Everflame burning brightly between them, a new signal pulsed from the Remembrance in orbit. It was not the pacification frequency. It was a data stream, an information codex of immense size transferred to the Cathar archives. It contained everything the humans knew: schematics for the broadcast network, censored data on the other galactic threats, their complete history, their philosophy, their art, their science. It was not the tribute of a vassal to a new master, nor the reparations of a defeated enemy. It was a gift, the foundational knowledge of a new, shared future. Vorlag watched the data pour in, his mind expanding with the sheer scope of what the humans were offering. They were not merely offering an alliance, they were offering partnership. They were holding nothing back. Their trust was as absolute as their logic. He looked at the human ambassador, then out at the stardusted sky above the memorial chamber. The warship that had come too late had not won their war. It had won them. It had won their future. It had arrived after the final battle was lost, but just in time for the first battle of the only war that mattered to begin. And as the last light of the Cathar sun faded and the galaxy revealed its cold, silent, stardusted majesty, Vorlag felt not the despair of an ending, but the terrifying, exhilarating weight of a new beginning. The silence was waiting, and for the first time in a million years, someone was preparing to answer back.